The sky over Cornwall dawned with that leaden color pilots had learned to hate. It was August 15, 1940, and the Battle of Britain had been consuming men and machines for weeks. But here, 60 miles off the coast, far from the formations of Spitfires and Hurricanes protecting London, the scene was different. It was almost peaceful. Almost. The airspeed Oxford Mk.I droned through the low clouds with the clumsy grace of a duck trying to fly. Its twin Armstrong Siddeley Cheetah 9 engines vibrated at slightly unequal frequencies, creating that characteristic hum that made veterans smile with condescension. It wasn't a fighter. It wasn't a bomber. It was a trainer, a platform of wood and fabric designed to teach young men not to kill themselves before reaching actual combat. Inside the cramped cockpit, Pilot Officer James Crawford gripped the controls with hands sweating inside leather gloves. 22 years old, red hair hidden beneath a leather helmet, green eyes still shining with that dangerous mixture of excitement and terror that characterized rookies. He'd flown solo only 12 times. 12. And now here he was, at 4,000 feet altitude, with an instructor sitting behind him who seemed more interested in smoking his pipe than supervising. "Hold course 270, Crawford," came Flight Lieutenant Henry Blackwood's bored voice through the intercom. Great War veteran, 53 years old, curved back and hands that trembled when not holding something. They'd pulled Blackwood from active combat 3 months ago. "Nerve problems," the doctors said. "War trauma," the other pilots whispered. "Coward," some of the younger ones thought. Crawford corrected course 2 degrees to port. The Oxford responded slowly, as always. Speed, 140 miles per hour. Altitude, 4,200 feet. Visibility, about 3 miles under the clouds. Perfect conditions for a navigation training flight. Terrible conditions for anything else. "Sir," Crawford cleared his throat, "shouldn't we be closer to the coast?" The briefing said many things, boy," Blackwood interrupted, and Crawford could imagine the older man blowing smoke against the side window. "We're exactly where we need to be. Navigation route Charlie 4. Learn to read a map before questioning orders." Crawford felt heat rising up his neck. He knew how to read maps. He'd been the best in his class at navigation. But that's not how things worked. You were new, you stayed quiet, you obeyed. Even when the instructor was clearly drunk the night before and probably still half intoxicated now. The Oxford continued its monotonous drone through the gray sky. Below, the Irish Sea was a dark, rolling mass, occasionally visible through openings in the clouds. Crawford checked the fuel gauge, 3/4 full. More than enough to complete the circuit and return to RAF Bab Down. 1 hour and 40 minutes of absolute tedium. Except that, in the back of Crawford's consciousness, something itched. There was something wrong with the sound. Not with the Oxford's engine, that he already knew, every irregular vibration, every off-key note. It was something else. A distant sound. Deep. Rhythmic. Like the beating of a giant heart echoing through the clouds. "Sir," Crawford said again, more urgent this time, "do you hear that?" Silence on the intercom. Then, after what seemed an eternity, "Hear what, Crawford?" "The sound of your own anxiety." But Crawford noticed something in Blackwood's voice. The edge of mockery had disappeared. There was attention there. The instructor was listening too. The sound grew louder. Definitely engines. But not British engines. There was something different in the timbre, the cadence. Heavier. Deeper. Crawford turned his head, scanning the sky through the Oxford's scratched perspex canopy. Nothing to port. Nothing to starboard. Nothing above in the low clouds. Then he looked down. And his blood froze. Emerging from a bank of fog 1,000 feet below them, like a shark rising from the depths, came a Heinkel He-111. The distinctive green and gray-green camouflage pattern was unmistakable. The black crosses on the wings gleamed even under the diffuse light. The German bomber's glazed nose pointed northwest, straight toward Liverpool. Crawford didn't breathe. Couldn't. It was as if all the training, all the classes, all the simulators and briefings had simply evaporated from his mind. There it was. A real German bomber. A few thousand feet away. And he was in an unarmed training plane. Unarmed. The word echoed in his mind like a death sentence. "Christ Almighty," came Blackwood's voice, now completely sober, all trace of boredom gone. "Crawford, turn to starboard." "No." "Turn and drop into the clouds." But Crawford didn't move. Couldn't. He was hypnotized by the sight of that deadly predator gliding through the sky, completely oblivious to the presence of the small training plane above it. Inside that Heinkel were 5 crewmen. Tons of bombs. MG-15 machine guns. MG-FF cannons. German technology destined to turn Liverpool into rubble. And Crawford was in an Oxford. A training plane. With wooden structure. No weapons. No armor. No chance. Crawford. Blackwood's voice exploded in the intercom. "Turn now or I'm taking controls." The sound broke the trance. Crawford pulled the stick to the right, initiating a gentle turn. But his eyes remained fixed on the Heinkel. That German war machine continued its course, undisturbed, its 4 Jumo 211 engines roaring with constant power. And then Crawford saw something that made his heart jump. In the Heinkel's dorsal position, where there should be a gunner watching the skies, the gun turret was empty. The glass dome reflected the gray of the clouds. Nobody was looking up. Nobody had seen the Oxford. The Heinkel was vulnerable. An impossible, insane idea began to form in Crawford's mind. "Sir," he said, keeping his voice as steady as possible, "they haven't seen us." "Obviously they haven't seen us, you idiot." Blackwood snarled. "Because we're an insignificant target in a plane that can barely reach 180 miles per hour. Now drop before." "Are we armed?" Crawford interrupted. Absolute silence. "Then, what did you say?" "This Oxford," Crawford repeated, feeling the madness of the question itself. "Does it have any armament?" "Anything." Another silence. Longer. Crawford could hear his own accelerated breathing, the hum of the engines, the whistle of wind against the fuselage. "There's a Vickers K on the rear mounting," Blackwood finally responded, and his voice had that tone men use when they're about to say something very stupid or very brave. "Mounted for air-to-air gunnery training. 2 drums. 180 rounds total. 303 caliber." Crawford felt something warm spread through his chest. It wasn't exactly hope. Hope was too big a word. It was more like possibility. "Can you fire it, sir?" "Crawford," Blackwood said slowly, "what you're thinking is the stupidest thing I've heard in 23 years of aviation." Crawford didn't respond. Just kept the Oxford in its gentle turn, keeping the Heinkel in sight while watching that German Predator continuing its deadly path toward the Liverpool shipyards, where thousands of civilians slept, unaware of the death approaching through the clouds. "It's an He-111 bomber," Blackwood continued. 5 crew. 3 machine gun positions. Armor. Maximum speed equal to or greater than ours. And we're in a training plane with wooden structure and a single obsolete machine gun. "Yes, sir." "They'll tear us apart." "Yes, sir." "We're going to die, Crawford. You understand that? We're going to die." Crawford finally turned his head, looking through the cabin to where Blackwood sat in the instructor's position. He couldn't see the older man's face, but could feel the eyes fixed on him. 20,000 people in Liverpool, sir," Crawford said calmly. "Maybe more. Shipyards, docks, factories, homes." The roar of the engines filled the silence. Then Blackwood made a sound, half laugh, half sob. "My God," he murmured. "You're so young you don't even know enough to be afraid." "I'm terrified, sir." "Good." Blackwood moved in the rear cockpit. Crawford heard the scrape of metal, the click of a mechanism being readied. "Because that keeps us alive. Maybe. For another 30 seconds. The Oxford continued its turn, and now Crawford could see the Heinkel's complete profile. It was beautiful, in a terrible way. Elegant lines, that characteristic glazed nose, the belly full of death waiting to fall on innocent targets. "Crawford," Blackwood said, and his voice had changed completely. It was no longer the bored instructor. It was the veteran, the survivor, the man who had seen friends die and kept flying. "When I say you're going to dive, straight at him, out of the sun, if we can manage it. I'll have one chance, to hit something vital. Engine, fuel tank, cockpit, anything. And if you miss, then they'll turn and transform us into confetti. Simple as that." Crawford swallowed hard. His hands gripped the controls until his fingers hurt. "Understood, sir." "And Crawford," Blackwood added, and now there was something almost gentle in his voice. "It's been a pleasure flying with you." Before Crawford could respond, Blackwood shouted, "Now, dive." Crawford pushed the stick forward. The Oxford dropped its nose and fell toward the German bomber, and the world exploded into speed, wind, and the impossible sound of a training plane going to war. The wind transformed into a howl as the Oxford plunged through layers of cold air. The plane's wooden and fabric structure vibrated with an intensity Crawford had never felt during training's controlled dives. This was different. This was violent. The altimeter spun counterclockwise. 4,000 feet. 3,800. 3,600. The Heinkel grew in the windscreen. With each passing second, that German Predator became more real, more solid, more impossible. Crawford could see details now. Riveted metal panels, the oily sheen of engine exhausts, even small imperfections in the camouflage paint. "More to port," Blackwood shouted through the intercom, his voice almost lost in the wind's roar. "I need an angle on the dorsal turret." Crawford adjusted, banking the Oxford slightly to port. The dive angle increased. 45 degrees now. 50. The structure groaned under the pressure. The airspeed indicator trembled. 160 miles per hour. 175. 180. They were exceeding the aircraft's maximum speed. Inside the Heinkel He-111, Feldwebel Klaus Zimmermann sat in the navigator/bombardier position in the glazed nose, checking maps with a meticulousness that had kept his crew alive for 17 missions. The route was correct. Liverpool, 15 minutes. Targets, Gladstone docks and naval shipyards. Payload, 8 SC-250 bombs of 250 kilograms each. Enough to cause significant damage. Behind him, pilot Hauptmann Ernst Weber held the controls steady, the 4 Jumo 211 engines singing their deep, constant song. Weber was 31, blonde hair cropped close, and had that kind of quiet confidence that came from 50 completed missions. He wasn't worried. Not today. Cloud cover was perfect. British resistance was concentrated to the south, over London. This would be a simple mission. Get in, bomb, get out. In the ventral gunner position, Unteroffizier Hans Richter yawned and adjusted himself in the uncomfortable seat. 19 years old, too small for infantry, too quick with his hands to stay on the ground. He saw no threats. Just gray clouds, dark sea below. Boring. The dorsal gunner should have been Paul, old Paul, who smoked those terrible cigarettes and always had a dirty joke. But Paul was in the hospital in Calais with pneumonia. The position was empty. Nobody looked up. 3,000 feet. The Oxford was now only 600 meters above the Heinkel. Crawford could see the exhaust from the German engines leaving trails of gray smoke. Could see sunlight reflecting off the glazed nose. Could see, my God, could see a figure in the cockpit, a blur through the glass. Real men. Not targets. Men. His hand trembled on the stick. "Steady, boy," came Blackwood's voice, calmer now, almost paternal. "Don't think of them as people. Think of them as the bomb. The bomb that'll kill British families if we don't do this." Crawford took a deep breath, exhaled slowly. His flight instructor had said, "Control your breathing, control the plane." Bullshit at the time. Essential now. 2,800 feet. The scrape of metal came from behind. Blackwood was positioning the Vickers K, a light machine gun mounted in the Oxford's rear cupola. .303 caliber, same as used in infantry rifles. 2 disc drums, 90 rounds each. Rate of fire, 950 rounds per minute when working perfectly. When it worked. "Crawford," Blackwood said, and his voice had that strange quality men acquire before doing something impossible. "If this goes wrong, if they hit us, you don't try to save the plane. Understood? You jump. Open the parachute. Survive." "Yes, sir." "I mean it." "I know, sir." 2,500 feet. Crawford could see the Heinkel's empty dorsal turret now, that glass dome reflecting the gray sky. A perfect circle of vulnerability. If Blackwood could hit there, he could strike the fuselage interior. Maybe damage the controls. Maybe injure the crew. Maybe wasn't a battle plan. But it was all they had. 15 seconds, Blackwood counted. "I'm going to need you to stabilize completely when I say. No movements. No corrections. Just hold straight and level for 3 seconds. Can you do that?" "I can, sir." "Liar," Blackwood laughed bitterly. "But I appreciate the spirit." 2,200 feet. The Heinkel filled Crawford's vision. He could read the letters painted on the fuselage now. G1 plus HK. Could see oiliness on the metal flanks. Could see small openings, the machine gun positions. 3 of them. 3 positions that could swivel and pour deadly fire into the fragile Oxford. But they still hadn't seen them. How was it possible? How had a war bomber, crewed by veteran professionals, not detected a training plane diving directly at them? The answer came to Crawford with sudden clarity, because it was unthinkable. It was so absurd, so contrary to all tactical logic, that it simply wasn't in the German crew's threat repertoire. Nobody attacked an He-111 with a training plane. It was suicide. And they were doing exactly that. 2,000 feet. 10 seconds, Blackwood murmured, and Crawford could hear him breathing heavily through the intercom. The older man was preparing the sight, adjusting his body into the uncomfortable firing position, trying to anticipate the Vickers recoil. Crawford checked the controls one last time. Ailerons functioning. Rudder responding. Port engine. Stable, starboard engine with that familiar but not dangerous tremor. Everything as normal as it could be in a completely abnormal situation. 1,800 feet. The sound of the Heinkel's Jumo engines now penetrated through the Oxford's own engines. That deep, powerful, hypnotic roar. Crawford felt something strange, a kind of reluctant respect. That German machine was magnificent in its lethality. Designed to kill. Built to survive. And they were going to attack it with an infantry machine gun mounted on a wooden plane. 1,600 feet. 5 seconds. Crawford tightened his fingers on the controls. His heart was beating so hard he was certain Blackwood could hear it through the intercom. 1,400 feet. 3 seconds. The world reduced to absurdly sharp details. Crawford could see a small stain on the Heinkel's port wing. Could see how the sun, weak, struggling through the clouds, created a reflection on the dorsal dome. Could see the engine exhausts shimmering the air behind them. 1,200 feet. Now, level OFF. Crawford pulled the stick gently, leveling the Oxford. The transition from dive to horizontal flight created G-forces that pushed his stomach against his spine. The plane shuddered, protested, but obeyed. For one impossible brief moment, the Oxford was flying perfectly straight, perfectly level, perfectly exposed. 300 meters above the Heinkel. Ta-ta-ta-ta-ta-ta-ta. The Vickers K opened fire. The sound was much louder than Crawford expected. Even through the roar of the engines, even through the howl of the wind, that metallic staccato penetrated everything. The vibration traveled through the entire Oxford structure, making the plane shake as if having a seizure. Crawford saw the tracers, lines of orange-red fire cutting through the space between them and the Heinkel. 90 rounds per second. Small pieces of metal flying at 2,440 feet per second toward the German bomber. 3 seconds felt like 3 hours. Then everything changed. Inside the Heinkel, the first round struck the fuselage with an almost delicate tink. Metal against metal. Hauptmann Weber turned his head, confused. Hail. Here. The second round punched through the side window with a burst of glass. The third hit Zimmermann's navigation console, sending sparks cascading. The fourth, fifth, and sixth rounds tore through the cabin's thin ceiling. Fewer! Someone screamed. Fire! No, under fire! Weber threw the Heinkel into a sharp turn to starboard, engines roaring with sudden strain. But he was late. Too late. A line of bullets from the Vickers traced its deadly path through the fuselage, aft to forward. Crawford, still holding the Oxford level while Blackwood continued firing, saw the impacts, small flashes of light where metal was punctured, small explosions of debris. And then, as if fate itself had decided to intervene, one of the rounds hit something critical. The Heinkel's No. 3 engine, the inner starboard, spat a plume of black smoke. Not the normal kind of exhaust smoke. Black smoke. Dense. Oily. Stop. Cease fire. Crawford shouted, but Blackwood had already stopped. The Vickers drum was empty. The Heinkel began to fall. Not dramatically. It wasn't like in the movies Crawford had seen. It was more subtle. A gradual tilt. An almost elegant loss of altitude. The damaged engine continued spewing smoke, and now Crawford could see flames, small, not yet threatening, but growing. Inside the bomber, chaos. Motor Dreh ist aus, the engineer shouted. Engine 3 is out. Weber fought the controls, trying to compensate for the asymmetric thrust. The Heinkel shuddered, yawed hard to starboard. Warning lights blazed across the instrument panel like Christmas gone mad. Zimmermann looked up from his shattered navigation console, blood running down his face from a cut above his left eye. Through the glazed nose, he could see the sea getting closer. Too close. Too fast. Hohe Verlieren. Losing altitude. In the ventral position, Richter finally understood they were under attack. He swung his MG-15 desperately, scanning the sky. Where was the attacker? Then he saw it. A twin-engine plane, climbing away to port. But not a fighter. Too big. Too slow. Too wrong. Was Zum Teufel? What the hell? It was a training plane. A goddamn training plane. Crawford pulled the Oxford into a climbing turn, his heart hammering against his ribs. Behind him, Blackwood was reloading the Vickers with shaking hands, trying to fit the second drum onto the mounting while the plane bucked and swayed. "Did we?" Crawford started. "Engine hit," Blackwood confirmed, his voice tight with adrenaline and disbelief. "He's trailing smoke." "But Crawford, he's not down. He's still flying." Crawford looked back. The Heinkel was indeed still airborne, but wounded. The black smoke pouring from the starboard inner engine was thick now, and the bomber had lost at least 500 feet of altitude. It was turning, slowly, painfully, back toward the south. Back toward France. Back toward safety. "He's running," Crawford said. He's smart, Blackwood corrected. 3 good engines, damaged controls, crew probably wounded. He can't complete the mission. He's trying to get home. Crawford felt a strange mixture of emotions. Triumph, they'd hit it. Fear, it was still dangerous. And something unexpected, relief. Relief that those German airmen might survive. That he wouldn't have to watch them burn and fall into the cold sea. But the fight wasn't over. Crawford, Blackwood's voice came through, harder now, he's still got gunners. And they've seen us. If we get close again. Bang. A tracer round streaked past the Oxford's port wing, so close Crawford could see the glowing core. Then another. And another. The ventral gunner had found them. Dive. Blackwood screamed. Dive now. Crawford shoved the stick forward. The Oxford's nose dropped like a stone. More tracers zipped past, angry red lines in the gray sky. One punched through the fabric of the lower port wing with a sound like tearing paper. They were being shot at. Actually shot at. This was real. This was... Crack. Something hit the fuselage behind Crawford's seat. Metal screaming. The smell of cordite suddenly sharp in the cockpit. Blackwood. Crawford yelled. Blackwood. No response. Terror flooded Crawford's veins like ice water. He twisted in his seat, trying to see behind him, but the bulkhead and his restraints limited movement. Blackwood. I'm here, came the voice, strained but alive. Keep diving, you idiot. Don't stop. Crawford obeyed, pushing the Oxford into a steeper dive. The altimeter unwound rapidly. 2,000 feet. 1,500. 1,000. The tracers stopped. Crawford risked a look back. The Heinkel was now 1,000 feet above them and a mile away, still trailing smoke, still turning south. It wasn't pursuing. Couldn't pursue. The damaged bomber was focused on one thing only, survival. Just like them. Crawford pulled the Oxford out of the dive at 600 feet, the controls mushy and slow to respond. Something was damaged. He could feel it in the stick, a looseness that shouldn't be there. Talk to me, Blackwood, Crawford said, forcing his voice steady. Are you hit? A pause. Then, nothing serious. Round went through the rear canopy, took a chunk out of the mounting frame. Missed me by inches. But Crawford. What? We need to land. No. Something's wrong with the control cables. Crawford had already felt it. The rudder response was sloppy. Aileron authority reduced. They'd taken damage. How much, he couldn't tell until they tried to land. If they could land. He checked his heading. RAF Babdown was 30 miles northeast. 30 miles that suddenly seemed like 300. Can you see the Heinkel? Crawford asked. Losing sight of him in the clouds, Blackwood reported. Still heading south. Still smoking. I'd say. He paused, and Crawford could hear the grim satisfaction in his voice. I'd say he's not making it to Liverpool today. Crawford nodded, even though Blackwood couldn't see him. They'd done it. A training plane and an obsolete machine gun had turned back a German bomber loaded with death meant for British civilians. It was impossible. It was insane. It was the truth. Blackwood, Crawford said quietly, that was the stupidest thing I've ever done. A laugh came through the intercom, real, full-throated, almost hysterical. That was the stupidest thing we've ever done, boy. And if we survive the landing, I'm recommending you for court-martial. Court-martial, sir? For being too stupid to know when to run away. Another laugh. And then I'm recommending you for a medal. The Oxford droned toward home through the gray sky, trailing pieces of torn fabric from its damaged wing. Behind them, somewhere in the clouds over the Irish Sea, a wounded Heinkel fought its own battle to reach France. Both planes, predator and prey, each trying desperately to survive what should never have happened. What nobody would believe.